Shabbat Shalom, David and Ed and Ronen. I can't see you yet, but I'm sure it will be good to see you when you turn on your video if you can. If you can't, don't worry about it. Right now it's just good to see me. If you're able to do so, it'd be lovely to see your faces. If not, I totally understand the craziness of getting on at this hour. So if it makes the most sense to stay without camera, it's totally fine. We are going to begin on time so that we can also do Havdalah on time. So if you are in the Lev Shalem, we are on page 214. If you are in the Sidur Sim Shalom for Shabbat and festivals, we are on page 226. And if you're in the full volume Sim Shalom, hello Ed, the one person I can see, we're on page 558 in the full volume Sim Shalom. Ashrei Yoshe Veitecha, Od Yalu Chasela, Shem Shekachala, Shem Shadonai Elohav, Tehillah David, Haronen Arucha Melech, Baruch Hashem. מלכותך מלכות כל העמים, וממשלתך בכל דור ודור, שמחנה לכל נפלים, וזכה בכל אבותים. פותח את ידיך, משביע לך רצון, צדיק לב בכל דרך, וחצי בכל מסע קרוב אדוני. תהילת אדוני ידבר פיו, ויברך כל בשר שם קודשו לעולם ועד, ואנחנו נברכיה, מעתה ועד עולם, הללויה, ובא לציון, גואל השבת אשר יבנו, אדוני ואני. ואתה קדוש ישב תהילת על ישראל, וקרא זה אל זה ואמר, קדוש קדוש קדוש, אדוני צבאו, מלוך על הארץ כבודו, ומקבלים דין מן דין ואמרינן. ותישאני רוח, ושמע אחרי כל רעש גדול, ברוך כבוד אדוני במקומות. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. אדוני צבאות עמנו, משגב לנו אלוהי יעקב סלע, אדוני צבאות אשר דם בוטח בך, אדוני יושיע, המלך יעננו ויום קורנו, ברוך עלינו שבר לכבוד וידעו לנו מן הטובים. ויפתח ליבנו בתורתו, וישם לבנו אהבתו, וירא טוב ולעשות רצונו, לעבודו בלב שלם ולמען. ויבטחו בך יודעי שמך, כי לא עזבת דורשך אדוני, אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיל תורה וידיר. We've entered the hello, it's so nice to see a few more people. We've entered the moment now where we will read some Torah. So as we've done in our service, as we continue to be on Zoom, we will not be doing aliyot, or calling people up to the Torah. I will be doing all of the reading for you. We are in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, chapter 21, verse 10. And if you are in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, I will tell you a page in just a moment as soon as I can find it. We are beginning Parashat Ki Teitzeh. Give me 1 second. 21. And Parashat Ki Teitzeh, I can talk while I do this. Parashat Ki Teitzeh has many. I just want to point out to everybody that I had a marker in my Chumash that whole time and just didn't see it. So Parashat Ki Teitzeh has many laws, and many laws that you've heard before. So for those of you who were with me Shabbat morning, I talked a little bit about how Deuteronomy is a book that is seen as kind of the second telling of many of the things we've already experienced. And here too, we are getting a parasha full of these laws that we've heard before, that we've seen before, that we've learned before. Some of them a little different, and as I'm going to teach in a few moments, some of them are also now qualified in a different way because we are post-Exodus as opposed to pre-Exodus. So we're not going to read that many verses because in Mincha we only do 3 aliyot. So you're not going to get that much Torah right now. But you can flip through the parasha if you want to see that which is a little bit different and that which is seen the same in terms of the laws that we have in our Torah. So again, we are in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 10. And I'm going to go all the way through verse 21. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishan b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Ki tetzeh l'milchama al oivecha nitano Adonai Elohecha beyadecha v'shavita shivyo v'ra'ita b'shivya eshet yafa to'ar v'chashakta v'lakachta lecha le'isha והבאתה אל תוך ביתך וגילתה את ראשה ועשתה את ציפורניה והסירה את שמלת שביה מעליה ויושבה בביתך ובכתה את אביה ואת אמה ירך ימים ואחר כן תבוא אליך ובלתה והייתה לך והייתה לך לאישה והיה אם לא חפצת בה ושילחתה לנפשה ומכור את תמכרנה בכסף לא תתעמר לא תתעמר תחת אשר עינתה. Second Aliyah, verse 15, chapter 21. כי תהיינה לאיש שתי נשים, האחת אהובה ואחת שנואה, וילדו לו בנים אהובה והשנואה, והיה הבן הבכור לשניה, והיה ביום הנחילו את בניו את אשר יהיה לו, לא יוכל לבקר את בן האהובה אל פני בן השנואה הבכור, כי את בכור בן השנואה יכיר לתת לו פי שניים בכל אשר ימצא לו, כי הוא ראשית עונו לו משפט הבכורה. This Aliyah that I just read is extremely difficult to read, talking about how you will choose between two of your offspring if you should need to choose. So if you would like to read through it again in the English, it was verses 15 through 17 of chapter 21. A very difficult law to be hearing. And this next one is one that many of you probably know, Ben Sorer Umore, a wayward son, and what we do with this defiant child. Ki eleish ben sorer umore einenu shomea bekol aviv ubekol imo. He didn't listen to his parents. Ve'yisru oto ve'lo yishma alehem ve'tafshu bo aviv ve'imo ve'hotziu oto el ziknei iro ve'el sha'ar mekomo ve'amru el ziknei iro benenu ze sorer umore einenu shomea bekolenu zolel vesovea urgamu kol anshe iro be'avanim v'amet ve'irat hara'ah mikirbecha ve'chol Yisrael yishme'u ve'yir'u. Again, an extremely difficult law to listen to. Thank goodness our rabbis, after the Torah is understood and discussed, get rid of those as laws for our people. We no longer see children as defiant of their parents in need of being flogged or stoned, which is a great thing for our people to know today. We are going to continue now with the silent Amidah. So if you are in the Lev Shalem, that is on page 223. If you are in the Sidur Sim Shalom, that is on page 234. And if you are in the full volume Sim Shalom, that is on page 574. If you have not yet finished your Amidah, please continue at your own pace. We are going to continue now with the Aleinu, which is on page 231, page 248, or page 598. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה יוצא בראשית, שלא נסענו כגבורתו, ולא שמנו משמעותו. ואנחנו קוראים, משתחווים ומודים, לפי מלך מלכים, המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שנו שמיים וארץ משמעו. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Kaddish Yatom, page 232, page 249, or page 600, Mourner's Kaddish. Ronan, would you like to unmute and lead us in Mourner's Kaddish?
Sure. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה.
Amen.
בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן.
אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה.
יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמד וקודשה בריחו.
Oh,
לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן.
amen.
יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Amen. So we are going to turn now to the teaching that I prepared. For those of you who have the sheet that we sent out on in the Shabbat bulletin, great. If not, thank you, Brant. I'm glad you have it. If not, don't worry about it. I'm going to call out verses and chapters. So if you would like to have a Chumash or any kind of Bible nearby, you are more than welcome to look up verse and chapter, or also just listen. You don't no need to actually look at them if it's easier for you to just listen. By the way, Larry Herman, I'm very glad to see you. I was nervous when I didn't see you at the beginning, so I'm glad you're here. I'm always nervous when there's not a Herman at a Minyan. Okay, so we are going to talk today, and as I mentioned at the beginning of my Torah reading, I want to talk today a little bit about these laws that we've seen before, but the category in which we are now seeing them again. So it is interesting for all of us when we're reading through Deuteronomy to think, why is this repeated as opposed to that, right? Why is this something that needs repeating for us to understand in a different way or in the same way? Or why was that thing not repeated, right? Why is none of Breshit, why is none of the book of Genesis repeated? None of it is repeated. It's mostly laws. It's mostly about how we practice, not about our narrative. But why? Who knows? I'm sure there are many, many, many reasons. But these are good questions to ask while reading through the book of Deuteronomy, given that we are hearing so much about our collective narrative again. So what I wanted to do today was talk about a few of these laws that you definitely know. You might not know where you know them, but you know them, and yet they're in the category of laws that we need to know and do because we were once slaves in the land of Egypt. Which, if I were to just say to you, what laws do you think would be important to do or to adhere to, knowing that we were once slaves in the land of Egypt? You might say things like, don't have slaves, don't work people harder than you're willing to work yourself, those kinds of things. But yet the laws that we're going to look at today have nothing to do with that in the working kind of sense. But you will see that that memory that we're supposed to have is supposed to take us through a journey of how we treat others around us. So this is supposed to be interactive. Unlike when we are in person, we don't have 30 or 40 minutes. So unfortunately, I probably won't get to all of your questions or all of your comments, but I would love for you to be able to ask them if you have them, and for this to be something where we're learning together. You're not just listening to a lecture. So if you have the sheet in front of you, we're going to start at the top, Deuteronomy 24, verse 17. And I only bring this verse to give you context. We're actually not going to spend so much time in this verse today, but I want you to see where it goes. So it says here, Lo tateh mishpat ger yatom velo tachbol beged almana. So you shall not take away the rights of the stranger. You should not subvert them, make them lower than your own, or the fatherless. You shall not take a widow's garment in pawn. Right? So it's basically saying, treat someone the way that you expect to be treated. Do not subvert them. But also don't take something from someone that you're going to then sell. I actually believe a few months ago when we saw this law the first time, I talked about it. Maybe not in Mincha, maybe in Shabbat morning. But this is a law that we are now seeing for the second time. Okay. Chapter 24 of Deuteronomy, verse 18 says, remember that you were a slave in Egypt, v'zacharta ki eved hayita b'Mitzrayim, and that Adonai your God redeemed you from there. Therefore, I give you these laws to observe these commandments. Okay, it's talking here about that commandment that I just read to you, about making sure that the rights of those who are less than you in terms of their own rights are seen as equal, and that you don't take advantage of those who might need protection. Any questions about this thus far? Or thoughts or counter sermons? Yeah, Larry.
Well, the translation doesn't include the conjugation of the.
Ah, very good. Very good. So what Larry is pointing out is that the Hebrew, which I read, is vezacharta, which assumes that there's something else before it and after it, right? And you shall remember, right? So you should do this thing, and that is because you shall remember that you were once slaves in the land of Egypt. Great. Thank you, Larry. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Okay. So the next verse, and for those of you who have the sheet, I know that there are commentaries on there. I'm going to get to some of the commentaries, but not all of them. So if you read a commentary that you're interested in, feel free to ask about it, but I'm not going to go through every single commentary. So this next verse, verse 19 says, when you reap the harvest in your field, and ki, which is the Hebrew here, can be when or if or because. When you reap the harvest in your field and overlook a sheaf in the field, so you overlook something that you could have harvested for yourself, don't turn back to get it. Lo tashuv velakachta. Interesting, tashuv, this is not what I'm trying to get at, but I just want to point this out for you. Tashuv comes from the same root as tshuva, that returning to yourself, right? So they're using that same word here. Do not turn back, do not return to get that sheaf that you could have harvested for yourself. It will go to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. The same three categories of people that we mentioned in the first verse. In order that Adonai, your God, may bless you in all of your undertakings. So Rashi says on this something extremely interesting. He says, although it came into this stranger's hand without the owner meaning to leave it, right? He wasn't going according to the laws of Peah, which we'll see in a second, which is to actually leave corners of your field for those people to get those extras, so to speak. He just forgot it. He oversaw it. He didn't mean to leave it, but he did. It follows logically that he will certainly receive a blessing if he does this intentionally. So even if he doesn't do it intentionally, he receives a blessing. But all the more so if he does it intentionally, he will receive blessing for it. Now, just keep in the back of your mind that all of this is under the category of reminding ourselves, having that memory that we were slaves in the land of Egypt. Okay, all of these laws are in that category. You must therefore admit that if a sela, like a bundle, it's an amount used for wheat in the Torah, fell out of one's hand, and a poor man found it and supports himself by it, then he will surely be blessed on that account. You forgot it. You didn't mean to forget it, but in this particular case, someone really needed that to feed their family or to make sure that they could sustain their own hunger. So you're blessed. You as the owner are blessed, even if you didn't know that you did that. Any comments or questions on this particular verse? Yeah, Larry. Oh, Larry, you went away.
I was going to say that I think a lot of these have to do with preserving dignity.
Good, great. Say a little bit more about that, and Larry will get to you.
No, but if you're going through a field, I'm not a farmer, and whether you do it intentionally or unintentionally, and you leave it for someone who's less fortunate, and you're not giving it to them by handing it to them, you're preserving their dignity. And a thing about being a slave is you don't have any dignity.
Great. So these are categories of how we need to treat other people. Even if we don't know that we are treating them that way, we need to give them something that we didn't get when we were slaves. Great. Yeah, Larry.
That gets to the point that I was going to make, which isn't about this verse. So I can't say for sure, but if you go back to verse 16, which I don't want to read,
Yeah.
it's a different subject entirely. So we start with verse 17,
Right.
and we know that the Torah didn't actually originally have chapters or
Yeah.
verses, so that's artificial. But there is a connection. Notice that I made the comment about verse 18 starts with a vav, with an and.
Yeah.
Every other verse then starts, almost every other verse subsequently starts with a key, which is
Yeah.
a conjunction, however you translate it, as when or if or because.
Yeah.
It's a conjunction. Up until, I know you're going to get to this, at the very end we go back to that you were a slave in Egypt, and everything here is connected. And the question is, that we have to be asking the whole time, it's not the individual questions, is why is this being charitable, being decent, being a good person in terms of your communal responsibility? Why is this particularly connected to being a slave in Egypt? I don't have an answer. That's just the question.
That's exactly the question. You got it. You nailed the thesis on the head. That's exactly the question. And that's why I started it at verse 17, because as Larry's pointing out, if you go backwards, you'll see there's tons and tons and tons of laws. But this one starts a category of laws that are all interwoven with or bookended by you were a you were a slave in Egypt. And so you shall treat other people having that as your memory. And it's fascinating. And this is exactly what I was bringing these verses for, was the question that Larry asked. Why? Why these particular laws and not the other laws? There are other laws that take care of humans just as much. Why are these laws the ones that need to have that qualification, need to, as I call this teaching, have that visceral memory of doing something so that it reminds you that you were also slaves in the land of Egypt? So let's turn the page, or for those of you who are not on the sheet, go to verse 20. When you beat down the fruit of your olive tree. So those of you who have olive picked before, you know, you kind of shake them and that's how the olives come off of them. Do not go over them again. Don't shake them a second time. Don't pick them a second time. That shall go to, again, the same categories here: the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Now, here are two different commentaries that I absolutely love. One of them is by Rabbeinu Bachia, who says, do not go over them again means, it's just the plain meaning. Meaning, don't search the branches. Get all you can, but then walk away. Don't shake the branches and say, I only got 30. I thought I might get 50 when I came across this tree. Just walk away. You got what was meant for you. Now take a step back and walk away. But the Midrash on this says, don't consider yourself a great person, a beautiful person, because you have given them or deliberately left them olives under your tree. Don't be so full of yourself because you didn't search it a second time. The moral lesson here is that you shouldn't publicize these acts of kindness that you perform. So you're not going over it a second time because you're such a great person. You're not going over it a second time because someone else deserves to go over it a first time. And someone else might need it more than you. So don't give yourself a pat on the back. It's just the right thing to do. You haven't done something so great by not going over it a second time. You've just done the right thing by not going over it a second time. I'm sorry I didn't include the Hebrew. I think originally I didn't include it because I didn't have space on the page. But I'd be very interested to know, and I will go back and find this out, what the Hebrew is for beautiful. Is it yafeh? Is it literally to be a beautiful person, or is it to be a righteous person, right? To use the word tzedek like we had in this morning's parsha. So I'm sorry that I didn't leave this in here because it's a question that I have of myself that I didn't recognize when I took it out. In the Gemara, in Chulin, it talks now about this mitzvah of peah, which I referred to before, of leaving parts of your field for other people specifically. Not as a mistake, but you are specifically, as a farmer, as someone who works the land, supposed to leave parts of your field for others. It applies to one's vineyard, and that's derived by this verbal analogy between the term after you, acharecha, which is the word used in the verse. After after you, as it is written, when you beat your olive tree, you shall not go over to the boughs after you. And the school of Rabbi Yishmael, so Rabbi Yishmael was a teacher and all of his students taught, that term, you shall not go over the boughs again, means that you shall not take all of its splendor. And the reason that I'm interested to see what they use for the word beautiful is because it could be this same word tiferet, which is where the Gemara might get this idea, that in all of your splendor and all of your glory, rather you shall leave a person for the people who come to glean from it. So what we're saying in this particular verse is that we want to make sure that you don't think you're so great. You don't become those Egyptians who, when they gave you a little extra something, they pat themselves on the back. We want you to know this is just the right thing to do. This is what you do for other people. You take care of them because, again, you were once slaves in the land of Egypt and no one took care of you. So one more verse. We're going to skip one. We're going to go to verse 22. And then we're going to get to my favorite commentary, and then I'm happy to take a few questions before we do Mariv. Vezacharta. So we're going back to Larry's Vav here. And you shall remember. Ki eved hayita be'eretz Mitzrayim. So it's telling us again. And now, after these laws, you shall again remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Al ken anochi mitzavcha la'asot et hadavar hazeh. And because of that, God has commanded you to do this mitzvah. Because of that. Because of the memory. Right? And that's why I called this text study visceral memory. Because it's not just that you remember. It's that you have feelings based on that memory that guide you to treat people better. So it's memory, but it's also, it's like in your kishkas, that because you know that you were treated badly, you must never treat others badly. And here is my favorite commentary on this whole thing. Vezacharta ki eved hayita. Sforno says on this line, and you shall remember that you were once a slave, because at that time, you were in need of even an unripe grape. So all the more so that we should leave our crops when they are ripe and beautiful and juicy and ready for picking. Because when you were slaves in Egypt, you would have taken anything you could get, even an unripe grape, because you were hungry and you were in need of sustenance. And that's where I got this idea of visceral memory. Because Sforno wouldn't say, or Sforno wouldn't claim, I should say, because Sforno also was not there when we were slaves in the land of Egypt, but Sforno wouldn't claim that we as a people were hungry or in need of unripe grapes if he didn't believe that we needed to feel that hunger or feel that hatred or feel that desire to be supported and cared for. We wouldn't do any of these things. We wouldn't take care of other people if we couldn't also feel those things based on other memories that we've had. So I'm curious if anybody has any counter sermons or thoughts on this. But I want to finish my teaching by saying that I think that this is an extremely powerful way of us going through the book of Deuteronomy specifically, that we need to actually take our memory of the 4 books that came before, understand the feelings that we had, understand the things that we went through, understand the ways in which we were treated, because all of the laws that we are now supposed to do as a people for and to others need to be rooted in those feelings that we had, good or bad. If we were taken care of well, we should remember how we were taken care of to take care of other people. If our siblings were not great to us, We need to remember the story of siblings when they were not good to one another and how they dealt with that. But we need to have memory, and not just memory in our minds of, oh, that was a good story, but really feel it. Really feel what people needed and craved. And I'll leave you with this one nugget. When we read the story of being slaves in the land of Egypt, one of our commentators, and I'm sorry that I don't remember which, and Rabbi David Lieber, Zichrono Livracha, used to say over and over and over again this teaching. So in my mind, he's the person who said this. The people were actually not treated so badly in Egypt. They were fed. Yes, they had hard jobs. They were treated as slaves. But when it comes down to it, they weren't treated as slaves the way that we think of slavery. The reason that they called themselves slaves was because they did not have Shabbat. They weren't able to practice their religion in the way that they wished. Now, I don't know that that's true. The commentator also doesn't know if that's true. But it's interesting to think about that goes along with this same category of visceral feeling. We felt divorced from or stripped of our identity. And so that's why the Torah continues on to give us Torah, to give us those laws, to give us those connections back to the religion that was taken away from us when we were slaves. Branch, you wanted to say something, and then I'm happy to hear
I'm saying is that in some respects, this talks against unbridled capitalism. Except for the fact that it does say that if you do this, you too will be blessed. Well, I presume that means if you take care to preserve the dignity of these people and leave, the bows unshaken and stuff, that somehow that comes back to reward you. But it kind of flies in the face of the idea that greed is good, that you have to give some in order to get some, and you have to preserve people's dignities. It's a responsibility, on people. If you argue the Bible applies to everyone, but especially on Jews, if it applies to Jews.
Yeah. Judy has her hand up, and then Larry.
So I really resonate, Rabbi, with your call to us to not just utilize memory as something that stays in your head, but something that informs your actions. And that's what we derive from this Parsha of Dvarim right here. And I have a very quick contemporary anecdote. My parents were both survivors. Many of you know this. And my mom and her parents, actually her mom, my mom and her mom, were basically, they survived on water from cooked potatoes for the longest time, just the water. And when they were liberated and the Americans had food for them, people were rushing. My mom was a teenager and she just stood back. She couldn't bear to just dive right in. It actually informed the rest of her life, and it informs my life. She never wasted food. She always shared food with others, and she never threw away anything unless she absolutely had to. And that's a real example of taking a memory and having it inform for the better.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up, because as I was speaking, I also thought about the Shoah in a very similar way, that we need to be informed by how we or others around us felt during that time to make the world a better place, to make the world a place that's not as full of hatred and malice for absolutely no reason, but also to get to those moments of, I didn't have anything, and yet that makes me aware of the fact that other people also at times will not have anything. Thank you for sharing that. Larry, you get the last word.
First of all, I love listening to Judy. I hate coming after her because anything I ever say doesn't hold a candle to what she's always said. Thank you. And Rabbi Shah, it's a wonderful teaching. I'll be very brief.
Yeah.
I actually think we shouldn't have started in verse 17. I think we start in verse 18, and we start with the v.
Yeah.
Chazarta. We have 3 verses of ki, why, and then we end with the vizacharta. And at the very end, it says, et davar hazeh.
Yeah.
But what's the davar? Because the davar is not in that verse.
Right.
So the davar must be all these things that you taught about.
Yeah.
I'm not going to contradict your teaching. I do happen to think it can be viewed in a number of ways. Don't try to squeeze the last drop out of anything that you have.
Yeah.
Therefore, it can be taken as a teaching in terms of the way in which you treat your workers, which we weren't treated when we were slaves.
Yeah.
It can be treated a little like what Brent was talking about. I wouldn't use his language in terms of unbridled capitalism, but we need to be responsible. Don't strip mine to try to get every last bit of the mineral from the ground, because you destroyed the beauty, which can link to that in the land itself.
Yeah.
So if we take those 5 verses by themselves, there's a lot there.
Thank you. I totally agree. And it's interesting. I went back and forth on whether or not to have verse 17 in there, but I think you're right. It's such a beautiful way of bookending if it just starts at 18 and goes to 22, because we start and end with this passage of we remember that you were slaves in the land of Egypt. So thank you. Thank you for bringing that. We're going to continue now with Mariv, and then we will do a quick Havdalah at the end. Mariv begins on page 264 in the Lev Shalem, page 281 in the Sim Shalom, or page 200 in the full volume Sim Shalom.
And Larry, if I can interject, I always feel that way about you. How about that?
It's good to be in community when we can feel that way about each other. Okay. All right. והוא רחום יכפר עוון ולא ישחית, והרבה להשיב על פה ולא ירקול חמתו. אדוני הושיע המלך יעננו ויום קוראנו. ברוך אתה אדוני לנו מהכל העם אשר בדברו אמרי ואמרים בחוכמה ותיאשר עימות. ומעביר יום ומביא לילה ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה. אדוני צבאות שמו אל חי וקיים תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני המעריב והרבים. אהבת עולם בית ישראל חטא ומצוות חוקים ומשפטים אתה למדתו. ואהבתך תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל אל מלך נאמן. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. ואהבת אדוני לך בכל חודש. למען תזכרו ועשיתם כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אמת ואמונה כל זה כל יום עלינו. ומלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם משה ובני ישראל לכנו שירה בשמחה רבה ואמרו כולם מי כמוך בעלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר בקודש נורא תהילות עושה פלא. מלכותך ראו בניך בוקע ים לפני משה זה לי אנו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר כיפת אדוני תעקב וגלה מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל השכיבנו אדוני עלינו שלום ואמנו וכנראה ולחיים ופרס לנו ספר שמח ותקנים וצדקה. Ushmor Tzeitenu Voin L'chaim Ushalom Yatave Adolam Baruch Atah Adonai Shomer Amo Yisrael Le'ad. We'll turn now to the Whispered Amidah, page 270, page 286, or page 210. If you have not yet finished your Amidah, please continue at your own pace. I just want to point out that every Shabbat Mariv, so every evening that now has turned into the next week, I think about one line in the last paragraph of the Amidah, which says, Petach libi betoratecha uv'mitzvotecha tirdof nafshi. There's something really I read the verse many times a day, and it's really powerful to read for me on a Saturday night, because it gives me a new chance every week to think about this idea of opening my heart to Torah and to mitzvot and to good deeds that I can do for myself and for my family and for the world. And I should run after them. I should try to pursue them with all of my soul. So I just wanted to add that as something that we can all think about for this upcoming week. We are on the next page, page 279, page 292, or page 682, with the words Vehi Noam. Vehi Noam Adonai Eloheinu Masayadenu Konanalenu Masayadenu Konanehu Yeshav Betetel Yom Besal Shalayim. יקראני ועיני מונחי בצרח על עצי וכבדי אורך ימים אצביעו וערעו בשועתי אורך ימים אצביעהו וערעו בישועתי. We are going to turn now to Psalm 27. Actually, no, let's do Aleinu first, then we'll do Psalm 27, and then we'll do Mourner's Kaddish. So page 281, page 297, or page 696. Aleinu leshabeach ladona kol hatitkala yetzer b'rishit shelo asanu b'goy haaretz afilas u'mash. V'anachnu korhim v'ishtachavim u'madim lefnei melech malchei amlakim ha'kadosh baruch hu yishmor teshuvah v'yisrael. ככתוב בתורת אחרונים לא כלילה ונאמר והיה למלך כל הארץ ביום ההוא אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. I'm sorry that I do not know the page in all the other Sidurim, though if you have a different Sidur, you can tell us where Psalm 27 is. In the Lev Shalem Sidur, it's on page 113. Does anybody else have another Sidur and know what it is? Does anybody have the full volume Sim Shalom? Joanna, do you know where it is in that Sidur by any chance?
I'm using a different Siddur altogether.
Oh, you are? Okay, it looks like the Sim Shalom from here. Okay, Psalm 27, if you can find it.
The Slim Shalom, the normal weekday, it's 92.
Great, thank you. Okay. LeDavid Adonai Yorivi Shimimi Adonai Me'oz Chayimimi Evcha Bekorav Elem. Achat sha'alti met Adonai otavakesh. Shivti beveit Adonai kol yemei chayai. Lachazot benoam Adonai ulevaker beheichalo. לחזות בנועם אדוני ולבקר בהיכלו כי יצפנני בסוכה ביום רע יסרני בסתר לאמת שמע אדוני קולי יקרא וחונני ועינני אלחמה אל תסתר פניך ממני לולהם אנטי לראות בטוב אדוני בארץ חיים קבל אדוני חזק ואמץ ליבך וקווה אל אדוני. Joanna, are you reciting Kaddish during Mariv? I know. Okay, would you like to lead us in Kaddish?
Sure.
Wonderful.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah.
Amen.
Be'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei. בחייכון ובימיכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן.
אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם לעולמי עלמיה.
יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם עולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו
אמן.
עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Amen. We'll turn now to Havdalah. I'm going to turn my light off as soon as I light this candle here. Yanai nanai nai nai Yanai nanai nai nai Yanai nanai nai nai Yanai nanai nai 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 Yaina nai 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 Yaina nai 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 yana nai Yaina nai 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 Yaina nai nai yana nai nai Hine el Yeshuati Eftach velo efchad Ki ozi vezimratia Adonai vayehi li lishua Ushaftemayim besason Mimainei Yeshua L'Adonai Yeshua Alamcha virchatecha sela Adonai tzevaot Imanu Miskav lanu Elohei Yaakov Selah Adonai Tzevaot Ashrei Adam Boteach Bach Adonai Yoshia Hamelech Yaneinu Veyom Koreinu La Yehudim Hayta Ora Vesimcha vesason veikar kenti elanu kosi Yeshuot esa uveshem Adonai ekra yainanai yananai nai nai yainanai yananai nai 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 Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei peri agafen Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei minei vesamim Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei milrei ha'esh Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Hamavdil ben kodesh lechol Ben or lechoshech Ben Yisrael le'amim Ben yom hashvi'i L'sheshet yamei hamaseh Baruch ata Adonai Hamavdil ben kodesh lechol Hamavdil ben kodesh lechol Chatotenu yimchol Zareinu v'chasveinu yarbe yarbe kachol Ve'akochavim balayla Zareinu v'chasveinu yarbe yarbe kachol Ve'akochavim balayla Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov. I'm trying to get the smoke alarm to not go off. Shavua tov, Shavua tov. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Agiladi, Bimera ve'yameinu, Yavo Eleinu, Imashiach ben David, Imashiach ben David. Shavua Tov, everyone. So nice to be with you this evening. Tomorrow morning at 11 a.m., if you are available and interested in learning with Rabbi Richard Camras from Shomrei Torah. He is an incredible teacher, and I'm sure we'll have beautiful Torah to share with us. So 11 a.m. And I see, Marshall, now that you chatted, that on the TBA website, it had the wrong source sheet available. So I'm very sorry that you were learning along with the wrong source sheet. But I will make sure that it is sent out so that people can refer to it if you want it. All right, Shavua Tov, everyone. Really, really nice to see you, and I will see you this week. Shavua Tov. Thanks for being here.
Question: if we want to zoom out of Shabbat, do we stay on this or go out and come back in?
I think it's a different link.